The contents of this interview, or from Awake and Empowered Expo LLC from Ethann Fox and Flower of Life Center for Human Evolution, is for informational purposes only and does not necessarily reflect the viewpoints held by these organizations or individuals. Always consult with your doctor or health professional before making any changes to your diet, lifestyle, or prescription drug use. Please understand that you assume all responsibility and risk for the use or misuse of this information.
Hi, this is Jeffery Jaxen, and I'm here with Ethann Fox in the first of many installments of the Awake and Empowered weekly recap radio show. What's happening is, as we get closer to this expo, which is in October 11th through the 13th, we are encountering many more people and doing a lot more interviews, and we are afraid that some of the information might slip through the cracks because the interviews are being published very quickly. So what we like to do is give some highlights and our personal views from behind the scenes of each person we interviewed, and also the common themes that came up during all the interviews that we're finding. So this week we interviewed Joe Martino from Collective Evolution, Laura Eisenhower, and Ethann Fox interviewed Peter Garyaev from Russia. And the last interview we just did recently was Scott Stevens. I'd like to start with our first interview back at the beginning of the week, Joe Martino, and get your thoughts on anything that stuck out to you, Ethann, or just the interview in general.
Well, I was really impressed with, I believe he's around 24, 25 years old, and to be so aware of things going on in the world that, most people 30, 40, 50, 60 years old don't even understand the kind of things that he just somehow intuitively understands. And so I really appreciated his broad perspective and his understanding of our reality from an entirely more enlightened vantage point.
One of the things he said too, which really helped me, was that he came from a Catholic family that was very traditional, and instead of trying to change everyone when he was his first couple of years in college, he did all the work internally on himself and changed himself. And he saw the people around him and his family come around kind of full circle almost and start to subscribe to some of the stuff that he believes in and some of the stuff that he teaches, and follow his path, I should say, more, or come to him with some more questions that before, when he was trying to get them to look at it, they weren't interested. So I thought that's a common theme that I see keep popping up, is when people decide to be the change, to use the cliche, instead of going out and trying to change the people, that the people change around them. Are you finding that too with a lot of the interviews that you do?
Yeah, of course. I always tell people, especially in the circles that we're in, these are more conscious people, and they're trying to make changes in the world, and they're trying to live better lives. And I think quite often people who are walking a more conscious path, they get very frustrated with society because society is not moving along as far as they are. But the thing that we need to be aware of is that once upon a time we were less conscious than we are now, whether it's earlier in this life or in a previous life. We've been there before, and it's not our responsibility to change other people, but if we change ourselves, then the change from within us ripples across the rest of the planet. For every person whose consciousness raises, we are unavoidably affecting everyone on the planet. So yeah, be the change you wish to see in the world, like Gandhi said, is very appropriate in this case.
Yeah, and I think we're both looking forward to Collective Evolution 3. He seems to just go right into those things. And I was going to say he's going to be a force to be reckoned with in the future, but I think he already is now. So I look forward to a lot of great work coming out from him. The next interview I'd like to go over is Scott Stevens. Now, we interviewed Michael J. Murphy, who's going to be presenting in October at the Expo, and we are working on Kristen Megan. And we were lucky enough to interview Scott Stevens, who is a meteorologist and an expert in geoengineering, also a whistleblower, which makes his credibility in the eyes of the public a lot more stable, a lot better, because he was on the inside. He saw it from a standpoint as a meteorologist, and he also saw the meetings where they were told not to talk about this kind of stuff. So I think that was one of my favorite interviews personally, because not only is he a meteorologist, but he is, I think I mentioned it in the interview, he's kind of a new version of, he's a whistleblower, but he also has his hands in a lot of other stuff. He's an expert in Ormus. He works with Blue Water Alchemy and Don Gifford, and he seeks for consciousness of the planet. That's one of his big that's one of his big pillars of where he's coming from. I thought it was a really fun interview.
I find it very fascinating the how chemtrails are being used. And I always suspected, like, for example, when we have big hurricanes that cause a lot of damage, I always was suspected that there was something else going on there. And now we've heard from both Michael Murphy and Scott Stevens, and Scott Stevens really being an expert in that field of meteorology and having actually watched the weather maps and observed how chemtrails are being used to not only increase the size of storms, but also steer them toward landfall. So it puts into perspective a very different perspective when we see natural disasters in the world. You have to start to wonder if they're in some way engineered or not. And so I found that to be very interesting and fascinating. And obviously, it's not a very positive thing, but I think knowledge is power if you use it properly, and if you don't even know that to begin with, and you don't know that it's going on, you don't know that there's anything you should do about it or can do about it. Obviously in the mainstream you're not going to hear this kind of thing anytime soon, but it is. I think that was for me the most valuable piece of information. Yeah,
he mentioned too that he's excited to see the next wave of whistleblowers come out, and I think everyone knows that too. That's what we need, is continually having whistleblowers come out talking about this stuff. And we're in the process of getting Kristen Megan on. She's a newer whistleblower in the geoengineering arena, but she has a lot of common sense practices and also things that people can do on an individual basis as far as getting their water tested with their local counties and cities. Just I can't wait to interview her with that, because those are things that people can do on the ground that'll really show to really show each individual to, I don't know, make them possibly believe in something they don't believe in at this point when it's right in front of their face.
What I found, well, interesting, and I don't know if he knew something that he wasn't telling us, but Scott made the prediction that the next big thing that's going to happen is some whistleblower is going to come out, and he said, I predict it's going to be an airline. And then the next day or 2 days later, there was an article about an airline admitting that they've been spraying chemtrails. Yeah. So I thought that was very interesting that he predicted that, and 2 days after the interview, that was showing up in the news. Yeah. But I do see big changes coming in that area, and obviously we're working in that field to make changes as well. But that was very interesting.
That also leads me to Laura Eisenhower. Now, before we interviewed her, I did some research, and I didn't know much about her until I started watching her videos, reading her articles online, checking out her website. And in that time span, I became very excited to interview her, and she did not disappoint. I know you took the lead on that interview, but give me your thoughts on that, because there was a lot of information that was dumped in that interview.
I've listened to and watched Laura's lectures and interviews online many times, but I never realized she had so much energy until I interviewed her in person. I've never met anybody who could talk so fast and put so much information in a small period of space. And but there was so much information there, and a lot of it I was looking for confirmation to things that we had already done research on our own, and she really validated a lot of the channeled information that we've received here through our organization. That was very interesting. Like her explanation of Atlantis existing in another dimensional reality, and that's why we haven't actually found it physically here yet. She's just such a wealth of information and such diverse information. I don't even know where to begin with her, but it was truly a fascinating interview, which we'll be getting it up there very soon here.
My favorite thing about her is that she's taking information that may be hard to digest for the general public, and she makes it easy to digest. She makes it very, very common sense and brings it down to a level that I think it's the lowest common denominator when it comes to digesting that information and just getting it across. And she makes it really palatable. I like it. Now I have all my notes out in front of me for the last interview. Now you did this interview. You took the lead. Peter Garyaev. He is a Russian physicist. Scientist?
Geneticist.
Geneticist. Okay. And his specialty is wave genetics. So I'll let you take it away and I'll just jump in.
Yeah, for me, that was probably the most interesting interview because I'm 50% rationally minded, and I've walked that line between the spiritual and the normal intellectual world my entire life, and so I'm always looking for the place where the two meet, and because he's a scientist and he's worked from that vantage point, but at the same time he's perfectly comfortable talking about consciousness and extraterrestrials and things like that. I mean, it's a new breed of scientists that I'm seeing out there who have this rational scientific mindset and understanding and all the training and degrees to go with it. But at the same time, they can carry on a conversation about subjects that scientists ordinarily would run the other way, you know.
I find Kesh from Iran does the same thing. I've seen him talk about it without skipping a beat, going from talking about physics to extraterrestrials and working with them.
Right, and Shipov was the same way too in the interview that we did with him. In that conversation, we went from talking about torsion physics to consciousness, and he was perfectly, he can see where the two connect, and I think that's a problem with modern science is conventional science separates all these things. They think that there is no connection between consciousness and science, and that's where they're making a mistake, and that's where they don't understand why certain things happen scientifically, because they're taking out this whole component of the connectedness of the whole universe and those understandings. But anyway, with Garayev, it was really interesting because he's actually brought science to a point where mystics have believed for a long time, and so we're heading in this direction now. And the most interesting thing that I found about him, our conversation, was when I asked him the question, well, if I want to live for 1,000 years, can you do this for me now? And he said yes, and then he was explaining how it can be done. And what it boils down to in the end is he was talking about, well, right now, what we can do with our current understanding is if you have a child, we collect the stem cells from the umbilical cord and the placenta, and then we use that to collect the stem cells, and then from that we generate a sound wave, and we record that on MP3 and we send it to you, and you just listen to it every day for the rest of your life, and it'll extend your life to 1,000+ years. And what I found interesting about that is it all boils down to frequency in the end. And that's what we're finding with everything we're researching now with Lloyd Meir and with even Shipov's work. Everything is boiling down to frequency. And I think this is the future of our understanding, is we're heading into a future where the understanding of how to use frequency to change our experience in every which way possible is where we're headed from not only health, but also how to. I was watching a lecture with Michael Tellinger, who we've yet to interview, and I'm really looking forward to that one. And in the lecture, he showed a video of this guy, I believe it was in Europe somewhere, who invented this little device that boils water using sound frequency. Mm-hmm. And this is what Tellinger's work is leading to as well. Tellinger is really, his research is in archaeology in South Africa, and he's found these stone circles that they're measuring these high frequencies in frequencies that scientists say should not exist in these stone circles. And you walk outside the stone circle, the frequency isn't there. You walk inside the stone circle, all of a sudden you have this very, very high frequency. They've measured very high temperatures in these stone circles that don't exist, that should not exist. But ultimately, I think that's where we're heading, is we're heading into a future where we're going to understand how to use frequency to manipulate our physical universe. One of the things even Tellinger talks about is the Coral Castle in I believe it's in Florida, and how the gentleman who built that, he built it by himself, and he would lift these massive stones by himself somehow. Nobody ever saw him do it, and he wrote this book about essentially frequencies. He didn't really tell you how to do it, but he said that he built this gigantic complex by himself using the same principles that were used by the pyramid builders, and so that I'm seeing that connection in everything that all the people that we're interviewing and all the things that are going on. I'm seeing this this connection with vibration and frequency that is tying it all together. And I think that's where we're heading as a world.
One of the things I was seeing too is there's two routes that takes. There's the vibration and frequency transmitted by perhaps a generator, or computer, or machine. But then there's the frequency and energy transmitted by a person. And when it comes from a person, there's an extra ingredient of intention. And intention is a word that keeps coming up from everybody that we interview, including the scientists. And I think at one point we may have had all these abilities as people. We've lost it as human beings, and now we're regaining it, but only the people that are on the cutting edge are able to measure this with machines, are able to do this kind of stuff, except for those perhaps people on the fringe like healers or people of those sorts that have been dismissed as possibly by the skeptics of possibly not being able to do this, or the word that keeps coming up is placebo effect. But if it's continually working, is it really a placebo effect? And I mean, what is a placebo effect? If you're going to break that down, if it works, then it's actually something that works. I see the word placebo effect as being kind of stifling for progress.
Yeah, actually, when you bring up intention, there's several other experiments that Gary I've talked about. That interview is the audio is not very good, but it's a very, very good information. He talks about plant experiments where they use language combined with intention to see if human language transmitted genetic information. And what they found was when they distressed these plants, so they distressed two sets of plants, and the control, they didn't do anything to the plants. They spoke gibberish to it. So it was basically language that was not really saying anything without any intention. And the control plants did not change. They stayed distressed and unhealthy. And the experimental plants, what they did was they spoke different languages. I believe it was I want to say German and English and Russian. And they found it didn't matter what the language was, but if the intention was to heal the plant, they found that the genetic information in the plant changed, and the plant actually recovered completely and was perfectly healthy. And so, of course, in the conversation, I took it further to, because I always like to take things down to how can people benefit from this information. And so I asked him about relationships, and if this works for plants, does this mean that how we communicate to each other is transmitting genetic information to one another? And he, of course, said yes. And so we brought it down to, and I think this is really the most important thing that people don't realize, because in my studies as an astrologer, over the years, I've realized the importance of compatibility in a relationship, and I find that most relationships are not very harmonious. And so what he was saying in our conversation essentially was that we are always transmitting genetic information in our language. So if you are in a relationship or a family, or you surround yourself with people who are critical toward you, or who don't believe in you or put you down, those people are limiting your potential, and they may even be giving you illnesses. So if you have some sort of serious illness, it could it may not be your diet, although those are all factors. It may largely be the people you're surrounding yourself with, because they're transmitting this information. And the other conversation, so I took it further, was, well, what if you're with somebody who believes in potential that you don't even know that you have, or you may not even have? And is it possible that their belief and that intention combined with their language can actually manifest things in you that you might not have ever even had? And he, of course, he said yes to that too, which, to me, that is absolutely amazing information, because it means that if you are surrounding yourself with the wrong people, or you're married to the wrong person, by wrong, I mean, obviously there's no right or wrong, but by wrong, I mean who you choose to surround yourself with can make the difference between living a happy, fulfilling life where you're living beyond your potential, to a life where you have serious illnesses, or you're unhappy all the time. I mean, the repercussions are amazing, because you could have an amazing life or a mediocre life, depending on who you choose.
I think the words he said was the verbal genetic information if you're married to someone that perhaps verbally abuses you, destroys your spiritual body, and then shortly after it begins to affect you into your physical body.
Right. And he even went on further he talked about how foul language does that. And I thought that was interesting because, and it didn't seem to matter what language it was. It's just foul language, probably partly because of the intention of the language, combined with the words, destroys DNA. Mm-hmm. I mean, it makes perfect sense. But until now, we haven't had any science to support it, right? And so that's what I find most fascinating about the interview with him was these things I already knew. And of course, a lot of people who are listening to this already knew this, and mystics have been talking about this for thousands of years. But now all of a sudden, we've got the scientific community coming in and being able to validate what we've already believed. And I think that's important in modern society because a lot of people have been indoctrinated into this belief system of conventional society, and as a result, they totally have lost touch with who they are and where they are, and I think we really need the scientific community, people like Gerayev and Shipov and Kesh that you mentioned earlier, and others like them who have this scientific background, who can bridge the gap in understanding between science and consciousness and spirituality and all these things, and be able to see that connection. And do the actual research and bring that research to the world so that we can start shifting that paradigm of understanding in society. Because people like me, I can go stand on stage and talk till the cows come home and talk about all this stuff. And only, obviously, those of us who are of that understanding will be in the audience, will get it, but the mainstream audience is going to need that scientific mindset to bridge that gap. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's what I like about what these scientists are doing in these various fields. And I'm noticing more and more people in the scientific community are starting to walk all these different paths. They're starting to bridge this understanding between these different facets of understanding that up to this point have stayed different and separate.
Well, until next time, take inventory of who you hang around with and who is in your life. And are they making you a better person, or are they destroying your physical and spiritual body with their verbal genetic information? Talk to you soon.